I think we're gonna lump in keep nerding and keep reading into one thing here because I think we're all kind of nerding out about Daredevil as we are a week away from the premiere of episode 1 and 2. But in preparation for that, we here at the Point 3 podcast, of course, want to go through and know all that we can about these comic runs that inspire a lot of these CU shows that are coming out. So keep reading. We're going to talk a little bit about Frank Miller's Daredevil Born Again run. So, Hero, what were some general thoughts? How'd you feel about it? What are you thinking on it?
I mean, fantastic run. If you've never read Frank Miller Daredevil, both his first run and then him coming back on the Born Again title, or it's the main Daredevil title, but the story, amazing stuff. I will say that if you are a comic book fan, that's probably like I would never assign homework, in comic books together, but that's like comic book homework. That's the kind of stuff that if you're gonna do, if we're high school and this is, we're gonna make you read Romeo and Juliet. No, we'd be making people read Frank Miller's Daredevil run.
Oh man, I would have loved that. I would have loved that.
I would have loved so much. Yeah, it's so good, from the storytelling to revitalizing the character in many ways for a lot of different people as well, taking a different tone as well, advancing Matt Murdock's character as well, the rest of the supporting cast for Daredevil too. It's fantastic. I can't recommend it enough.
No, and I think in reading those issues, it really, you get a true feel of what it means to kind of see Frank Miller redefining Daredevil, going through and showing you how Kingpin dismantles his entire life. And I mean his entire life. I couldn't imagine that. I did pause for a second and I was like, I couldn't imagine not having a house, having no money, having no place to go, knowing that anywhere I go, my number one adversary literally probably has eyes on me, and I'm down so bad that I'm gonna be on a train and some dude's getting whooped, and I'm like, man, it's not me anymore. And then I snap and I'm like, psych boy, I'm going over the edge, dead. Like the way that the story was told from beginning to end, from both Kingpin and Daredevil's perspective. Daredevil, you just go through this roller coaster of emotion. And just like, how, bro, you're down bad. Like, that's the definition of down bad.
Yeah.
And
rock
Kingpin, rock bottom. And then Kingpin feels in the story like, bro, he's the boss. Like, he runs the streets. The world goes through Kingpin as you're reading this. And you're like, this guy, is he the GOAT?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the way that he does it so subtly too, that Matt can't even realize that it's him until, and spoilers obviously for this story, but this story is very old already. So,
1980s, we're not.
Yeah. So if you don't want to hear it, go read it, come back. But once he blows up his house,
yeah,
that's when Matt is like, oh, you did that. And he even says, mentally to himself, you shouldn't have signed this. I would have never thought it was you. And I just love that, because again, it just goes to show you how smart Kingpin is.
Yeah.
That if he really didn't show his hand and get too cocky with it, which he even says multiple times throughout the story, he probably would have won completely.
There are definitely moments throughout this that, like, I love the portrayal of Kingpin and him showing his flaws, and we'll talk about the Daredevil thing a little bit. I think they did a decent job of kind of showing the obsession that the characters have with each other. But like, after Matt Murdock tried to show up and try to beat Kingpin down with a pipe, Kingpin's like, nah, dog, see red. And then the taxi goes into the river.
Yeah.
And then there's no body. It's almost like he's like, I want you to live, because like, it's almost that Batman Joker dynamic of like, I can't really exist without you. And vice versa. It's like, I can't really exist without you. Like, you are my purpose for why I'm doing what I'm doing at this moment, but I think it's super cool. By the end of this, you literally have two characters at the end of Born Again where you're like, Kingpin is the Lord of Crime, not the king of the streets, the Lord of Crime.
Yeah.
And then you have Daredevil, who is the man without fear. No bullets, no bazookas, no guns, no. You can be anywhere at any time. Like at the end of this, you just have two S tier characters that just felt amazingly good throughout this entire story.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And he, Kingpin going with his obsession to the point where people are now actively questioning him. Obviously, it still provides bad consequences for them, which I still really, really like to see that he never loses that edge and that hold that he does have over just everybody. It's a complete hold where they don't really question. And those that do it, it always proves to be bad, even for reporter Ben Ulrich, where it's like he has such a nice involvement in the first Frank Miller run with Daredevil, with Matt, and figuring out and piecing all that together, and then trying to help him in this one to get out of this hole that he's in. But he knows that he is literally being watched at all times. He is at work being called to listen to another man, lose his life. Literally at work again, a simple janitor being like, "Hey, buddy, I'm glad you're not doing that," Just the mental headspace that he's in. And I love how they do it in the book where they just show him progressively getting redder to the point where it's like he's so scared he doesn't know what to do for a little bit.
Telling the story through, I think Frank Miller does this very well of kind of giving you kind of a third person perspective on the main character. So much so to that point on the flip side of it, where you kind of have the Kingpin going after Ulrich and you see his life and how he's affected. And like you get to that feel of like, if I associate with Matt Murdock or Daredevil, my life is at risk. I'm risking my life by literally knowing your name, right? But I did love where he gave Daredevil his flowers and he's looking after Daredevil comes back after being down bad. And he's like, he calls him Matt. And he's like, I shouldn't call him Matt. Give the man his due. He's wearing the tights. He's Daredevil, the man without fear. And then it's like, damn, Frank Miller. He's like, bam, Daredevil's back. And he tells that through Ben Ulrich's eyes. I thought that was a pretty cool moment.
Yeah. No, and then adding to that, just Daredevil, the journey that he goes through, kind of like we've already alluded to, from the lowest of lows now really to like the highest point that he gets to in the run towards the end, where he kind of finds out a little bit more about his own origin, finding out about himself, what he's capable of doing. I love that in his descent to madness, he still holds on to Foggy in a way, which probably my favorite scene was where he's talking on the phone and you think he's talking to Foggy and then he just leaves the phone hanging and he never called anybody, just talking to himself this whole time. It's great stuff, the way that they showed his mental headspace to where his heightened senses only make it worse for him. Like his descent is just worse because of his powers. Like he's able to smell this terrible hotel that he's in. He's able to hear every walk and he thinks like this is it for me.
Yep.
They're after me.
Yeah.
And then to see him on the flip side of that, when he comes out and goes toe to toe with Nuke, who is just a super soldier, and he holds his own and he's so clear in his senses, knowing exactly what to do, even if he is outclassed, just goes to show you how Daredevil as a hero is.
Oh, I mean, if you were like, I don't know if I really like Daredevil. If you read Frank Miller's Man Without Fear and the Bornagain series, you will probably walk away with this of like, this guy has to be one of my favorite Marvel characters. Like the relatability for everything that he's going through, his humanity, like he feels super, but at the same time, like he's a superhero, but he feels like he feels like a man that just, bro, every time I think about it, it just really is surprising that you can feel for Matt in this way and then feel for him as Daredevil, but then also feel for Kingpin and then feel for Foggy and Karen, like everyone that kind of shows up that has somewhat of a decent role in the story, like your heart is kind of hurting for them in so many ways. It's, yeah, Nate, to that point, I mean, it was really good, but I do want to call out one thing to that point. Again, it's been out since the 80s. When the Avengers essentially show up after the nuke fight, typically you're like, the Avengers showed up, like the real team showed up. I'm like, you guys showed up and Daredevil feels like an ace next to you guys. He feels
Yeah.
like an ace next to Iron Man. He feels like an ace if Thor's there. He feels like an ace with Cap. That to me was surprising, although I knew it happens. Reading it, getting to that point and going on that journey, he felt S tier.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just cool because it's like clearly he still thinks about it. Where he's like, should I stand down? And I love that. I love that he only thinks about it till he tells himself, till he's able to reason that he's like, don't be stupid.
Yeah.
Like this isn't the place for that. But in reality, could he probably go toe to toe with Iron Man? Probably. Could he go with Thor? Probably not. But we just saw him take on a super soldier. Obviously,
Yeah.
Cap is very different, but who's to say, you know? And I think that them making Cap sympathetic to Nuke too was a good point in there as well. Yeah, just he feels so good throughout all of it. The panel where he's standing out of the burning and it's just him in red with the bully club.
Yeah.
It's so good. It's so good. The art is fantastic throughout all of it. Like the way they convey emotion, just the close up on people's faces. It's all so good. My one big concern, or not concern, maybe reserve towards between this and the MCU is I don't see how they do this within the MCU, right? Because Netflix Daredevil has already taken certain elements from both runs and have adapted it in their own ways pretty well, I will add. But I don't see how this version of Born Again makes it into the MCU version of Born Again. I think they share it by name.
I have to agree with that in a lot of ways because I think it's widely known that there's a lot of inspiration from Frank Miller's Born Again that was put into season 3. But I think that was more so of like Fisk trying to figure out, like, he has his suspicions about Matt being Daredevil, and then ultimately by the end of it, he kind of confirms his identity when he's looking at that footage from the surveillance piece and all that. But like in the end, they strike a deal to keep his identity secret. And ultimately, it's kind of pulling on Fisk's want to really protect Vanessa as well. But I just think the core elements, as I read this and kind of we know what happens through season 1 through 3 through Netflix Daredevil, I think it was like a quarter baked, not even half baked in it, in terms of Kingpin wants to destroy Matt's life, sure. But in this run, in Frank Miller's run, it goes way deeper. You have Matt who's kind of leaning on his faith a little bit. Sure, you can draw parallels. Kingpin having his influence over kind of, the law enforcement police and kind of having his toe in everything. Got it. You do have your bullseye aspects of things that are in here. And then ultimately, Kingpin and Daredevil have that fight. But again, the big thing that I think is missing, to where when we'll talk about this in a little bit or maybe now, I think it's good that Born Again would have 2 seasons so that they could build to all of these things. Because I think having the expectation of like, oh, Born Again is going to kind of be like you were saying, kind of, you know, and have that likeness beyond just kind of name. There are a lot of core elements that I think are unknowns for us.
Yeah.
Like what foundation are we getting in the show that we can kind of really draw parallels from the story, because the story really takes us from an A to a B, where Born Again might be like a D to a C. We just don't know in that
Yeah.
sense. So we'll talk a little bit more about some other runs and some stuff that are more current, you know, through Chip Zdarsky and kind of maybe Devil's Reign and some other things that we could do that. Now, Nate, I think you said that. But I think that there is a little bit of confusion. That this is why you come to the Point 3 podcast and we talk on Discord. You know, Born Again is going to be kind of that name piece. So